You know that moment, right? You're faced with this giant wall of text, and there's that little box just begging you to click, I have read and agree to the terms and conditions. But have you? Have any of us? Because buried deep in that fine print are these really important terms, and today we're going to pull one of them out into the light, the exemption clause.
Yeah, of course you have. We've all done it. And, tucked away in those long documents are these powerful little legal phrases that are all about managing risk. The exemption clause is one of the big ones. And by the time we're done here, you're going to know exactly what it is, what it isn't, and most importantly, why it matters every single time you see that little button. Okay, let's get into it. So to really understand what an exemption clause is, we're actually going to start by figuring out what it is not. Think of this as our own little myth-busting session. We're going to look at a few common ideas about this clause that sound right, but are actually wrong. Okay, first up, does having an exemption clause in a contract somehow make the whole thing not legally binding? I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? If a company is already trying to get out of its responsibilities, does that just cancel out the entire agreement? That is a hard no. An exemption clause absolutely does not invalidate a contract. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. So here's the deal. For an exemption clause to even work, it has to be part of an already legally binding contract. Think of the contract as the car and the exemption clause as one specific part of the engine. The engine part can't do anything on its own. It needs a car to exist in the first place. All right, on to myth number 2. Every contract has a timeline, a 1-year gym membership, a 24-month phone plan. So is the exemption clause the part that sets those dates? And you guessed it, that's another no. While the contract's duration is super important, that's not the job of the exemption clause. This slide lays it out perfectly. The duration clause is all about the when, how long this whole thing lasts. The exemption clause is about the what if. What if something breaks or a service fails during that time? They're two totally different tools in the legal toolbox. Let's hit our last myth. So let's say you have a problem with a company that's halfway across the world. Where do you sue them? In your city or theirs? Does the exemption clause figure that out? And to round things out, the answer is, surprise, surprise, still no. This is another really specific job for a completely different kind of clause. So a jurisdiction clause is all about the where. It's like setting the location for the courtroom. An exemption clause is all about the who. Who's on the hook for the problem, no matter where that courtroom happens to be. All right, we've cleared the deck. We've busted the myths. Now that we know what an exemption clause isn't, let's get down to what it actually is. There you have it. So, what does that actually mean in plain English? It's basically a rule one party puts in the agreement to limit their own responsibilities. It's their way of saying, look, if something goes wrong, here's the line. I'm responsible for this stuff, but not for that stuff. And this right here, this is the phrase that really matters. Limits or excludes. This is the core of it. The clause can either limit liability, meaning put a dollar cap on how much they'd have to pay you, or it can exclude it entirely, saying they're not responsible for certain problems at all. It's all about reducing or even getting rid of their legal responsibility. Okay, so we've got the definition down, but let's be real. Why should you care? What does this actually mean for you when you're buying a new gadget or signing up for a streaming service? This is really the bottom line, isn't it? An exemption clause is all about shifting risk. Usually, it shifts it from the company over to you, the customer. So say you buy a new piece of software, and the terms say the company is not responsible for any business losses you have if the software glitches. If that program crashes and you lose a day's work, that clause could mean you're totally out of luck. So whenever you're scanning those terms, train your eyes to look for those keywords: limit, exclude, not responsible for. When you see them, that's a big red flag that an exemption clause is doing its thing. So now you can spot an exemption clause in the wild. You know what it's trying to do. But that kind of opens up a whole new can of worms, doesn't it? Just because a company writes it down in a contract, does that mean it's automatically fair and legal? Can they really exclude their responsibility for anything? The answer to that? Well, that's a story for another time.